there have been conversations about inventing new kinds of weapons, similar, projectile weapons, smokeless powder based, but using things other than primers, other than hammers, maybe, electrical charge, or there's also directed energy weapons. And the issue is, will the language of law have to become so vague that it's an inversion of the Second Amendment? Because I bring up the household chemicals, right? There's also household appliances that can be turned into some seriously devastating weapons. Household appliances. You watch these videos on YouTube, man, you'll be like, I didn't know I could do that with one of those things. And you'll be like, yeah. And I mean, people can easily make some pretty powerful and devastating weapons that could theoretically be more dangerous depending on the context, or even worse. Simple question, would you rather get shot or set on fire and have, second degree burns all over your body? There's some serious questions about that, because the long-term damage to skin is devastating. So when you look at what's available in the home for people to use as weapons, I suppose the argument is, yeah, but people, if they don't know how to do it or need, it's some kind of labor, then it's easy to pick up a gun and just use. I guess the ultimate issue is we're dealing with 3D printed weapons. We're dealing with new kinds of directed energy weapon technology that you can't even see. Infrared lasers, for instance, or microwave technology. What are they going to do? Are they going to pass a law saying the transmission of any kind of energy, object, material, mass, or other substance, or structure, or otherwise, that is emitted from one point from near one person by their control and makes contact with another person and by means causes a negative impact would be considered a crime? Like, does the law have to get to that point?
Sure. I mean, that's basically an argument that I gave to somebody about AR-15s. I said, the minute that Elon Musk invents a solar-powered laser rifle with unlimited ammo, I'm going to want one of those too, because that sounds a whole hell of a lot better than an AR-15. And so if, that's eventually, maybe not exactly that, but that's eventually going to happen. Like the pace of technology, I mean, as we know, you look at, internet technology, it outpaces the ability for government to regulate what is being invented. And that's really what we're talking about here is, how do we regulate human innovation? And effectively, that's what that's what people on the left are trying to do with the Second Amendment. And they've just, unfortunately, we've allowed them to be successful in some manner.
So one of the biggest challenges with directed energy weapons, say a massive, extremely high-powered infrared laser, which you can't see, can be pointed at someone or something and set them on fire or burn holes through structures. They've done naval demonstrations where they have a drone flying and they point this massive infrared laser and it just instantly hits it. It's the speed of light. And the drone bursts into flames and then goes down and crashes. One of the biggest challenges is the amount of energy required for that. With firearms, that energy is stored very simply as chemical energy in a cartridge and then is focused through the barrel. With some rifling, you get a spin, you get better accuracy. It converts that energy wonderfully. Directed energy weapons waste a lot of energy. But Ian,
graphene.
Exactly.
Graphene, you're talking about super capacitor batteries.
I mean, we're like, what, half an hour in? We haven't even talked about graphene.
Well, so I bring this up because, Ian, you often talk about graphene technology, how it's going to be revolutionary, and you're right. But don't you think they're going to weaponize it?
Yeah, they're going to use fusion pack power with graphene super capacitors to stir the charge, and they'll be setting stuff on fire from 600 yards. And
so what happens then when some kid finds his dad's graphene fusion pack IR blaster and he puts it on his backpack and then he's holding this like long, tube and then he just points it at people and then some kid just goes, "Ah," and then bursts into flames and then he's just pointing it and sweeping across and no one knows where it's coming from. It's just all these kids and bursting into flames and then he walks away. No one knows what happened. That's horrifying to think of. But the problem with these laws is that they don't stop that. Like you've mentioned this before, 3D printing. It's out. The cat's out of the bag.
I know, dude. I'm concerned with weapons of mass destruction, even though that's a vague term. Like, how do you define? And if you guys know legally, how do you define a weapon of mass destruction?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
When I think of like lasers or bullets, that's like a kid or a guy. Worst case scenario takes out 100 people, maybe 120 people. That's not, to me, really mass destruction. I think of like leveling buildings and blocks.
It says killing numerous people and leveling buildings, but there's no real.
So it's vague.
Right.
6 people could be numerous. That's what I'm concerned with is mass destruction, like the ability to wipe out cities, villages, towns, families, if we give that power to a dad that can forget and leave it out for his kid to pick up, then I start to get nervous.
I mean, I look at the judgment of some of our politicians, and I get nervous. I don't care if it's Trump.
Right,
I don't care if it's
dude.
Biden.
And the whole reason we're here is because of the Second Amendment, man. I mean, it's basically because they armed themselves and were able to overthrow a dictatorial monarchy.
That doesn't explain other countries. A lot of countries have these weapons. A lot of these countries have, you know, despot lunatics who are armed to the teeth. North Korea is building nukes. The benefit for the Second Amendment is actually great, and we're lucky the United States exists, in fact, because it's probably a deterrent. The famous quote, "You can't invade America."
Gun
because
behind every blade of grass.
I don't know if that's a real quote. I think it might be like
I've heard it's not, but I love it.
apocryphal.
Yeah, it's
but
not,
it's
right.
true. And now we've got millions of new gun owners.
About
So it's
20
it's
million.
20 million.
20 million. That's the rough estimate
That we know of,
New,
like
new
legal
gun,
gun, like
Yep.
registered gun owners, and then the 3D printing craze. And I just read an
Yep.
article, and maybe I should have brought it with me. That I think 3D printing guns has taken like an evolutionary leap in the last year.
Yeah, the technology is getting much, much better. 3D printing technology is coming down in price, and the materials that they can print with are getting much better. Metal 3D printing is already available. The price point is more than what a consumer can afford, but I mean, things are only going to get better over time. The technology is going to get smaller. It's going to get cheaper. So, I mean, the government is already behind the power curve in that way.
Well,
It
so you think.
it's just a matter of, you know, how bold people get about telling the government no, more or less. So I mean, if you have the 3D printing gun community that says, hey, look, we're just going to 3D print guns, and we're going to tell everybody that this is what we're doing, and we're going to dare the government to tell us to stop. I mean, that's really when you get to the point where decisions have to be made, more or less.
I mean,
You know, as a country.
technology for home manufacturing is getting better and better and better. It's not going to stop. They're going to have to ban home milling machines. You know, people who have CNC machines at their home. I know a guy who had a relatively small machining CNC machine for metal parts, and he could just take blocks of metal and cut them very easily in a small little building he owned.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that like manufacturing firearms at home is something new, or that the government never conceived of, that we have to deal with, is just so silly. Because I mean, in the 18th century, that's how you made a firearm. I mean,
Yeah.
you more or less had to either build it yourself, or you had. I mean, that's where the term lock, stock, and barrel comes from. You had a metalsmith that made the lock, the flintlock mechanism. You had a craftsman who made the stock, and then you had another metalsmith who made the barrel, and they put all those pieces together. And so your firearm, if it broke, you couldn't just take parts from your buddy's firearm to fix it, because they probably wouldn't fit. They'd be different size, different shape. I mean, that was the big thing that Samuel Colt brought to the table. You know, people credit Henry Ford for the production line and mass manufacturing, but
Interchangeable parts.
It was really Samuel Colt who did that. He modernized manufacturing and got to the point of interchangeable parts and mass production. There's a story, I don't know if it's true or if it's colloquial, but that he was, I believe it was I can't remember what government, he was trying to sell his revolvers to a foreign country. And so he went there, and as part of the demonstration, he put out a number of the revolvers on the table, and he fired them all to show that they worked. And then he took them all apart, and he put all the parts in a box and mixed all the parts together. And then he reassembled all the revolvers, you know, obviously with parts from other revolvers, so you couldn't tell what was what. And then he fired them all again to show that they worked. And everybody could not believe that was possible, that all the parts would work in the other firearms. And that was kind of the birth of, you know, mass manufacturing, interchangeable parts, and that was to the point. It was in the era where tooling and manufacturing techniques were getting to the point where they were precise enough to allow that to happen.
So now it looks like we're in the next phase of that with 3D printing. You can print the actual parts on demand in your house.
Sure.
Okay, so it wouldn't be the replaceable part revolution, but the I don't know what you
Home manufacturing.
Home manufacturing,
Yeah.
right? Yep, exactly.
And
Making home manufacturing
Low skill.
low,
No
right?
skill
Low,
barrier.
low skill, and I mean, I know all kinds of CNC machinists that can make a firearm with the machines that they have, no problem. But the idea is making it easy. I mean, I was interested in the 80% lower community, years ago. So basically, you can buy what's called an 80% lower receiver for an AR-15, and what that means is it has some of the machining operations are not been completed, so it's not considered a firearm. It's basically just a block of metal. It's not serialized. You can purchase one right off the internet and ship it to your home. It's not a firearm. So there was a community of people who are machining these into a finished receiver, and at first the techniques were pretty rudimentary. You bought a jig and you basically did it with a drill press. You just machined out everything one hole at a time, and they were kind of crude and messy. I mean, they worked, but they weren't all that great. And then Defense Distributed made the Ghost Gunner CNC. And so it's a small CNC machine about the size of a microwave, and you put your lower receiver in there in a jig, and you press the button, you walk away, and a few hours later, all the machining is done, and it's perfect, and
you don't
all
have
the corners are sharp.
You don't got to register that, or
No,
what?
doesn't have to be registered, doesn't have to be serialized. If you're manufacturing it for your personal use, you can't sell it because it doesn't have a serial number, but you can make them for your own purposes. So that was kind of the first iteration, and the Ghost Gunner costs about $2,000, so it's not like it's super cheap. But the point is, it made home manufacturing much easier, much more precise. Set it and forget it, and that was kind of the first.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have state laws,
craze.
right? You still have at the state level, you can't have certain weapons.
Sure, yeah. Every state is a little bit different, so you have to figure out what's legal in your state. I mean, in New Jersey, I know that they don't allow 80% receivers. There's other states, I don't know them all off the top of my head, but that's a big problem in and of itself. Is the laws are so convoluted, and they basically are just a number of traps, more or less. So you can assemble a firearm totally innocently and make something that is illegal without. You really have to know the law before you start putting things together that are outside of sort of the standard configuration. I mean, if you're building
you could invent something new,
right?
This is ultimately the bigger issue with everything is there's just invention. Someone's going to come up with something, and it's not going to be regulated. Designer weapons,
right? And that's a problem too, is because the laws are so convoluted, and because you have to get a federal firearms license, etc., to do certain things, SOT license, it's stifled innovation. So if you're a hobbyist gunsmith and you have a really good idea for a new type of machine gun that you think is very important, something. Let's say that you think this machine gun could revolutionize the U.S. military, and you really want to design this thing on your own. You want to patent it on your own, but you don't have a federal firearms license. You're going to be committing a felony very quickly. So
unless you get a boat and go out into international waters to do it, there you go.
Okay, building islands.
With John McAfee, you get on his boat and
yeah. I heard that there was a bunch of these ultra wealthy individuals who were going to buy a cruise ship and just park it right off of international waters so they can do whatever they wanted.
It's Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
The Chinese are building islands. That's an interesting concept.
Or you can go to China. China will let you do it. You could walk in and be like, "Hey, you want bullets?" They'd be like, "Good, do it."
So my concern here now is that trying to regulate the home industry is insanity.
It is.
That if you try to make it illegal for someone to do what they're doing, you're just creating criminals, and it's not going to stop. It might stop some of them, but it won't stop the innovation itself.
Look, early on in the United States, we greatly prospered because crazy people did crazy things out in the middle of nowhere. You had Marie Curie's papers are all radioactive. Yeah, you can't do that these days. You get anywhere near trying to do that kind of research, they're going to lock you up. There was some dude who was obsessed with it. I read this story where he was like a young guy, and he's taking smoke alarms because they had a little bit of...
That happened in Commerce Township, about
Americium
10 minutes from my house.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Yeah, in Michigan. And he kept taking little bits, and then he put it into, I think he had like a lead cast.
He built a breeder reactor in his in his shed.
And he radiated the town basically.
Yeah, I think he radiated the shed and his
Yeah.
house. But yeah, he
created a death beam.
He was basically just I want to say there's a book or a movie about it. It's called The Radioactive Boy Scout, and yeah, so he was getting these smoke alarms, and there's a small amount of radioactive material in there, and he basically collected enough of it that he could create a pile that would become a breeder.
Well,
yeah,
so
right.
he had like this casing with a funneling channel, so he could fire the
God.
particles as
Yeah.
a death beam.
Yeah.
And he was covered in lesions.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, he was very. Yeah, I don't know if he's still alive. He may have.
Did you ever hear the story? This is a brief aside of the guy who studied the first atomic bomb and touched it on accident. He dropped it on his hand, and it like sent a super shock wave through his body. He was like, "Ow!" And then he died
happened
2 hours later.
What happened was
About the Demon Core.
yeah,
Is that what you're talking about?
and they would hold it separated from critical mass with a screwdriver, and then one day it dropped it and it flashed, and then he picked it up, but it was too late. The
Yeah.
flash had
He
basically
died.
destroyed the
Radiation
protein.
poisoning.
I think he made contact with something, physical contact, and it shot through him like, instead of electricity though, it was like a deep penetrating radioactive pulse through his body.
Well, I don't know who that guy is, but there was a
we
story
gotta find
of
that someday.
the
Yeah,
Demon Core.
The Demon Core is killed. Like, there's been like 3 or 4 incidents with that same core where people almost created a.
They were holding a screwdriver between it to stop
between the
critical
two
mass,
halves,
and they would get
right.
it. They would twist it and get it close,
Yeah.
and then it dropped and. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.